I've been meaning to say that's a wonderful shirt you're wearing.
Likewise, it's a very, very nice shirt you're wearing.
Thanks. So, Shoyan, we first met at the YF program, and you were my teacher in 2017 to 2018. And I've been meaning to speak to you about this topic. So, we started this podcast as a way to engage writers and people who are interested in writing, and basically people who can't join a critical writing or a creative writing program, and to give them an understanding of how to improve their writing practice, right? So maybe a good way to begin this conversation would be, how do you view writing? What does writing mean to you?
Okay, that's a really big question, firstly. Thanks. But, okay, so I have a complex view, and I have a view of writing that has obviously developed over time. So maybe I can sort of answer this historically, right? Like, how has my view of writing changed over time? And in some sense, I've also understood that as I've looked back at my childhood, at my past. So I think, firstly, writing for me is discovery, right? It's a way in which you discover that, yes, I have thoughts and I have lots of ideas and there's lots of information that's in my head that wouldn't perhaps come out spontaneously. And it's in the act of writing that I discover that, oh, like these things are there in me, right? And I think for me, the act of writing in childhood was often that. You know, it was sort of discovering that I have processed and absorbed the world through my senses, through language, through reading. And here's a way to find out what that is and what that means.
What sort of things, sorry to cut you off, but what sort of writing did you do? Were you writing short stories, poems?
Not short stories, poems, I mean, not something so developed. But I think that my first act of writing as a kid, and what I remember very fondly, was of doing comics, I think, right? So there would be visuals and there would be text. And then, of course, I would be writing in school, right? And they would perhaps test you on something you knew. And just the act of writing that and finding out, okay, I know this thing, right? I think that was a very interesting experience. But as I grew older, and I would say, you know, like by the time I was 10 years old, 11 years old, I think writing started serving a very specific function, which it still does, of course, which is writing is invention, right? And I think that, you know, in English language, because that's the, that's the subject, I remember where this happened a lot. But we would have an essay, right?
Yeah.
And one of the options would be, okay, imagine you're in some scenario, right? Or write a story on something. So that would be, you know, one opportunity to...
ICSC?
ICSC.
Yeah, we had those three options.
Yeah.
One was an essay, one was a short story you could write, and the third one, I don't remember. Maybe a speech or something.
Yeah, so the short story option is something I would enjoy a lot.
Yeah, same.
Because it was a way in which you invented a reality, right? So it's like, okay, I have a lot of information, but there's a lot I don't know and a lot I'm speculating and inventing, right? So I think for me, writing became inventive around that age. And I think I held on to it for a long time. And I think it somewhat fed my desire to be a writer, to invent worlds. But of course, I mean, that's changed over time. I never really got into fiction writing, but I did have that aspiration for a bit. Moving ahead, I think by the time I came to college, it started serving a different function. I'll tell you why this happened. You know, we were told, I think in our first class, and I don't agree with, you know, what was told to us by teachers, that, oh, this is not a creative writing course, you know, don't go crazy in your writing, you have to be critical, you have to, you know, really think about arguments and so on and so forth.
Deconstruct.
I mean, that word came a little later, now that we understood what it was for a while. But I think that for me then, writing was about organization, right? It was about taking a lot of information and learning how to patch it together in a manner that spoke to another person. And I think that till that point, I hadn't really thought of organization in a very, you know, complex manner, right? So let's say when I'm writing a short story in school, right? Yes, there is a plot, but I'm not really thinking of it very consciously. right? What should be the sequence of the different elements in the plot, right? And this is something I started thinking about much more carefully through my undergraduate education. Then writing was also about synthesis, right? I mean, with organization, it's not just about like putting things in a sequence that makes sense, but learning to connect the dots and turn, let's say, simple elements into a more complex thing, right? And if we have to use the most obvious cliched analogy of a jigsaw puzzle, right? So, you could perhaps find an approximate fit, right? But it doesn't.
I'm thinking of Tetris.
Or Tetris, right?
Sometimes it falls right into place, and there are times where the pieces don't fit at all.
Yeah. So it doesn't feel integrated. It feels a little half cooked or half baked. And I would feel that with ideas sometimes, when I'm writing an argument, for example, or when I'm, just writing an essay on, let's say, a public or social issue, because that's the kind of writing that I started doing from undergraduation. And I think now I would say it's a combination of all of these things. But now for me, writing is thinking. If I have to really put it simply, writing for me is a form of thinking. It's the most democratic definition of writing I can give. And of course, I'm thinking even when I'm not writing, I'm thinking when I'm speaking. But I think with writing, it's a more specific, specialized, organized, inventive style of thinking. And yeah, I think if I didn't write, I wouldn't always know where I want to go with my thinking. So yeah.